are talking The Haunting of Pendle Hill, written and directed by Richard John Taylor. Now this is a low-budget British movie that takes its cues from a quote-unquote real apparent haunted area here in the UK. And it has a plot here which has two timelines, and it primarily focuses on a contemporary timeline with a character called Matilda, who is searching for her father, who has gone missing under mysterious kind of circumstances. But we also have a 17th century timeline where we are introduced to this kind of witch, or this kind of spirit of this kind of witch who lures people in, lures victims in, and these have a connective tissue between them. Now what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works first of all with The Haunting of Pendle Hill. So again, a low budget British movie, not one that's going to have a high amount of special effects and jump scares and things. It's a very slow burn film, trying to be much more of a mood piece than anything else. And on that subject, I do have to say that I think the movie does a reasonable job here of having a couple of kind of plots in that particular column. The kind of the location shooting here in this very kind of rural, old school English kind of town, with the kind of this old cobbled streets, this kind of misty woods. I think does a really good job of kind of setting a kind of classic ghost story. In this kind of this old-fashioned kind of feel to it, and there's a reasonable attempt here, I think, to recreate the kind of the feeling of the time in the kind of the 17th century films, with the kind of the costuming, I think the hair and makeup, the kind of the speech that's used. It is not entirely successful, but I think it's, for a low budget movie, I think it does a good attempt here at kind of selling on the fact that there are sequences and a kind of a storyline that takes place in the kind of 17th century, and it's moderately successful, and I think in doing that. Now again, it's a low budget movie, and the kind of the special effects are minimal. But when we do see something, I think it's done to a reasonable kind of standard, at least when we do have VFX on screen. It's very kind of sparse though, but I think because of that, when we do get something, it kind of works a little bit, a little bit at least. But there are a couple of instances here where I do think it has a kind of spooky charm to it. This kind of classic English kind of ghost story feeling that you would get with kind of like, remind you of kind of Charles Dickens and kind of stuff like that in some ways. And I think with movies that have a basis in, folklore, legends, apparent real accounts can kind of send you down a rabbit hole to try and kind of find out, what is the truth behind all these kind of legends and stories and things like that. And I think it's obviously in England we have loads of kind of these different kind of ghost stories and things that have apparently happened and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think it does a good job of tapping into that. The acting I could be honest with you, is a little bit of a mixed bag. I have mixed feelings on it, but I will say, and this might sound like a backhanded compliment, but it's not distractingly bad. And there's going to be a reason why I'm going to kind of refer to that, but I think it's okay. I think the acting is about okay for this kind of style of movie, but there is a little caveat with that, which I'm going to come on to. And if you certainly like a more of a drama-based kind of horror movie rather than a kind of a scary one, then this may well be for you. So maybe what doesn't work, and I'm just going to circle back to the acting. One of the decisions here would be to have characters speak in other accents. Of course, in our 17th century sequences, we have our characters almost speaking in a Shakespearean kind of style, kind of dialect, and it's, like I said, it's of mixed results. I appreciated the attempt to kind of have a little bit of authenticity. It's not entirely kind of successful, and we have our characters kind of repeating the same phrase over and over again because I don't think they know what else to say. There's a sequence where we have a character crying out for someone in the woods, and it's kind of like, "Where art thou?" And it's like, you can't just say that 10 times in a row, you would say something else. Things like this. And then we have our kind of our contemporary scenes where, of course, as is the case with many low-budget British movies, we have to have fake American accents to try and make this a sellable item to the States. And again, it's not brilliant. We have actors kind of slipping in and out of English and American accents. So again, it sounds, certainly to someone who is English, it sounds a bit fake, to be honest with you. And I think this does hamper the acting. I don't think the acting is necessarily bad, but I think when you have that extra level of having to do these kind of accents, it kind of brings you out of it, unfortunately. Overall, I don't think the acting is actually terrible, but I think this doesn't help and kind of makes it feel clunky at times. Now, there's a decision here to have the same actors playing descendants of each other in kind of the previous timelines. This may not be a critique for everyone, but for me, I don't like that trope because it makes no sense genetically. You're not an exact duplicate of someone who is who has lived previously and things like that. Obviously, you have mixings of DNA and other people have influence on your genetic structure. So it's one thing that always bothers me when we have films that kind of use the same actors to play descendants of one another, because it never really makes any sense to me. I get you might have similarities, but you're not going to be genetically exactly the same. So it kind of gets confusing about who you're watching sometimes, in some degree, purely on a kind of aesthetic level here. I feel the main issue with this movie, though, it's just long and talky. Well, I mean, when I say long and talky, the actual running time isn't particularly a long film, but it feels drawn out because it's a very kind of talky film. And we have these dialogue sequences, obviously, because we can't really afford to have, much in the way of kind of set pieces or, lots of kind of special effects. We pad out the running time by having more dramatic scenes, more kind of like talking in rooms or talking, in the woods and things like this. And it kind of ends up becoming a little dull at times, to be honest with you, because the horror elements here are very slight. We get a couple of attempts at kind of jump scares, but a lot of the times when we do see the kind of, let's call it the spirits and things like that, it kind of just looks like, just a girl. It doesn't really look particularly ethereal, it's not shot in a way which is makes it seem otherworldly. It just seems like a girl plonked there in a kind of a white dress. You could use lighting, shadow, maybe even the kind of the good old dry ice to make it feel a little bit more otherworldly, a little bit more ethereal, but it doesn't. It just looks like kind of a, someone kind of stood there. So you never really, I feel, get the impression this is an otherworldly presence, a spiritual presence. It just looks like, another actor, which of course, that's what it is. On a technical side as well, I think this movie has a little bit of a problem with some of the camera work here. It has the tendency to feel like very kind of handheld at times in scenes where it's more or less it should be a static, sort of camera, where it could, it should just be like more or less not shaking around like it feels like it has to at times. Again, it's distracting. It takes you out of the movie. I understand, when shooting action sequences, people use this technique to kind of give the scene more of a kinetic energy. But in kind of simple scenes, I don't know if it all particularly works, because you just kind of like, I'm just noticing the camera floating around and moving about, and it kind of takes you out of it. At least in my opinion. Maybe I've just watched too many films and I kind of notice these things these days, but who knows? For me, it just seemed like a little bit. It wasn't needed. It simply wasn't needed. The plot itself, I've got to say, is relatively slight. The actual 17th century sequences, I don't think really informed the contemporary storyline. I actually didn't think they were that particularly needed, to be honest, because it's not as if the story in that period has a huge effect on what's happening in the contemporary world, if that makes sense. So it feels like it just pads out a little bit. So overall, I do think there is some stuff here that kind of does work, but I've got to say, when you put it all together, it doesn't make for a particularly kind of interesting film. if you like slow burn, low budget movies, which I feel is a pretty, marginal audience, to be honest with you, but maybe if you like that kind of classic English style ghost story, you may get something out of this. But I've got to be honest with you, it's just a little bit dull and uninteresting, despite I think a couple of kind of like spikes in creativity at least. So for me, I'm gonna have to give this one a 3 out of 10. I can't even give it a 4, but I just don't think it's as interesting as it should have been. But there are some elements here that maybe warrant some positivity. But overall, as a package in itself, it's not a particularly interesting film, and it's not particularly kind of I think well delivered in some aspects. So 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.